Good morning all. Just dropped that down to my height. Thanks for being here and thanks to all of you in the room who are contributing to this really amazing program that we're several years into and are really starting to kick some goals. Particularly like to acknowledge everyone on the GBRMPA COTS team. You guys are doing a fantastic job of bringing all this together and I'm really impressed. You know, I'm 6 months into the role there and I've been so impressed with the work that they're doing, so well done. Okay, you've seen this already today, and this is actually, rather than the model data on the left there, that's just actually the empirical data from the Ames reefs, the LTMP data, and that's showing you how the COTS outbreaks moved across the marine park since the 80s, through till about 2017. On the right, you've seen that as well, and we can see that there's been 3 major outbreaks since the mid-80s. And I think Dave Wackenfeld made the good point this morning that in this most recent outbreak, the densities of COTS are not as high as what they were in those previous 2 outbreaks. Whether or not the COTS control program operations have had anything to do with that, we're not 100% sure, but we think it's probably made a contribution. If we have a look at how corals track through time, again, this is Ames LTMP data over the same period, you can see that coral declines and recovers, and it's essentially following with a bit of a lag behind the wave of the outbreak as it moves from the initiation area right down the marine park and eventually terminates in about the Swains and Cap Bunkers. Now, Roger just showed this slide, or a version of it, so I won't dwell on it, but I think there's clearly been some great improvements under the IPM. And the efficiency that we've seen in the program over these last few years has been unprecedented. So we are actually really starting to make some progress on this problem. And we're not there yet. There's many improvements that can be made. I think we're all aware of that. Those of you who are out on the water and you know how the data's being collected and how the COTS are being culled know there's room for improvement and all of that. But I think we have to have a good stone cold look at it and say that one of the most important things we have to do is choose the right reefs to steer our effort onto. If we don't do that, we're going to undermine all of the efforts that we do throughout the marine park. It's really important that we prioritise the right reefs for action. And that we get onto them early. And I think Dave Westcott made the really great point that on a lot of these reefs, we need to go hard and we need to go early. We need to detect these outbreaks early, we need to jump on it straight away, and we need to knock the populations down as quickly as possible. If we don't do that and we miss the boat, these populations are going to run away, the spawning is going to happen, more reefs are going to be infested with COTS. Right, so where are we now? All right, we've got 5 vessels and operating between Cooktown and Gladstone. Those little cupcakes all over the screen there are the 5 vessels. And we've actioned 222 reefs since the implementation of the IPM in 2018. So we're getting to about 100 reefs per year, effectively, and that might just be surveillance on some reefs, it might be surveillance and culling. But essentially, it matches with what Dave Westcott's projecting for over a 4-year window, about 460 reefs actionable. So that's about the capacity that we have within the program. So how do we optimally deploy that is the most important thing that we all have to grapple with. So we've invested about 31,000 diver hours in actually culling COTS over these last few years. We've got about 10,000 hectares, nearly 11,000 hectares of reef that's had rates of coral loss reduced. We don't know exactly how much coral we've saved, but we know we've saved probably a fair bit, when there's been over 240,000 crown-of-thorns that have been culled. All right, so at the moment, in the current operations, we're actioning about 147 reefs, and we have culling underway on 40 reefs at the moment. We have about 55 reefs where we've reached the actual target catch per unit effort threshold, and those reefs are now being surveilled and monitored to make sure those COTS don't spring up again. And then we have a bunch of other reefs, about 52, where we're just doing proactive monitoring only. So they're places where we actually haven't seen COTS above the target threshold, but we're keeping an eye on them because they have been prioritised for management and are considered important economically and ecologically for the marine park. Just also like a shout out to QPWS and the Reef Joint Field Management Program. The data that you guys are generating is super valuable, both the Manito and the RIS data. Ames LTMP, reconnaissance beyond the reefs that we're getting to with the COTS program vessels is really important. And as well as that, the tourism industry and the reports that you guys put in through the Eye on the Reef program. That data is all being used and it all is very useful. So yeah, we appreciate it. All right, if we have a look at the outbreak dynamics over the last sort of decade or, during the course of this current outbreak cycle, you can see that if we look at a sort of, aggregate 2011 to 2018 picture, there's a lot in the Cairns section, there's a lot in the Townsville section, and there's a lot in the Swains. All those red dots essentially are places where we've got severe outbreaks, and this is all mandatory data that's generated by the COTS program, it's generated by AIMS LTMP, and also by QPWS. Look at 2018 only, and really most of it was happening in the central section of the marine park and also down in the Swains, where we've got roaring outbreak of COTS down there, still ongoing. A little bit in the cap bunkers too. Quite a few reefs down there established outbreak densities. 2019, things were starting to drop a little bit in the central section, still in the Swains, roaring through there, cap bunkers roaring. Have a look at 2020, 21, so this is our most recent picture, of course. Swains, the densities are highest. There's a few starting to pop up in the far northern section as well. And there is, of course, reports that some of you guys from Inlock will know about these juveniles coming up in the Cairns section. So some of those being sighted on some reefs. So they're the sort of things we've got to be on top of. And Dave Westcott really outlined that beautifully, I thought, in that we need that proactive surveillance. We need that proactive monitoring. We can't be chasing it once it's already occurring. It's never going to get us there. So this continuation of money and ongoing work in this space, and Morgan's outlined it, and colleagues, we really have to do that. It's the most important thing, that we have this continuation of the program between outbreak cycles. All right. So if we look where the program vessels have been operating, Inlock's been running 3 vessels out of Cairns and operating in the northern section and into the central section. Pacific Marine Group have been operating through the Townsville section there in the central GBR, and BPM have been running predominantly in the Capricorn bunkers over these last few years. If you have a look on those maps, you can see all those grey dots. Well, they're the reefs that we've actually been actioning for COTS surveillance and culling. So all of those green dots are reefs that are at no outbreak status, and one of the things we've been grappling with at GBRMPA is, okay, we've got all these reefs at no outbreak status, yet we're still culling COTS on these reefs. And we know that despite the fact that we have an entire reef scale where we have no outbreak status and the densities are below what we would consider dangerous to coral loss, we still have isolated sites on those reefs where COTS are well above target thresholds. And that's why we have to really focus our cull effort on those sites. And that's really where the IPM has really given us a huge advantage. Okay, so a couple of case studies. Bramble Reef, this one's been actioned by Inlock over these last couple of years. You can see that the initial surveillance was February 2019, and at that point it was an established outbreak. They did a really good job actually, and they invested over 1,400 diver hours in that reef, and they knocked 28,000 COTS on the head. And it was last surveilled in August last year, and it was at no outbreak status. So you can see on the top right-hand panel there that that's catch per unit effort of the various size classes for COTS through time. And really they've locked it down to that blue line, which is down there, that horizontal blue line, which is sitting at 0.04 COTS per minute as a catch per unit effort measure. So they got it down there within about, what was it, middle of 2020. So in about sort of 18 months or so. Good effort. Lady Musgrave in the Capricorn Bunker Group, actioned by Blue Planet Marine. These guys again did a really great job. You can see that CPU graph on the right doesn't actually break it down by size class, but you can see that they knocked it down pretty quickly at the start, and then it bounced back up again and then declined again through continued culling effort. And that again is just shows you how important it is to get back onto these reefs and just do that repeat surveillance. And when you see these numbers bounce up again, you jump on them, you knock them down again. And that's the only way we're going to effectively manage these reefs, right? The real tricky one has been the reef that PMG have been activating over the last couple of years, and that's John Brewer off Townsville. And this is a reef that we know in all previous outbreaks that we've been monitoring has been hammered time and time again. So it was a severe outbreak, so it was very high densities of COTS when we first surveilled it in November 2018. There's been over 5,500 diver hours invested in this one reef and nearly 60,000 COTS culled on this reef. The latest surveillance, again, it's at no outbreak status, but we still have a lot of open cull sites there. There's still a lot of active culling going on this reef, and it's going to, at this rate, still be a while before you've completely nailed it. And these guys are doing a fantastic job of systematically culling this reef, yet it's just been one of those real troublesome reefs that's difficult to manage. So there's lessons learned in all of this is, when do we start a reef? What attributes are there about that reef that might make it easy or difficult to manage? When do we walk away from it? There's all sorts of pragmatic decisions that need to be made about how do we optimally invest the cull effort in this program. Okay, now Roger showed this little figure on the left, and that just shows you that over these last couple of years, we've seen multiple cumulative pressures across these reefs, right? So we've seen bleaching, disease, storms, as well as COTS, and all of these things are working together, actually, to reduce coral on these reefs. So all we're doing is actually trying to get rid of that COTS predation component of the coral loss and try and reduce what we're seeing here. And ultimately, this program is about protecting coral. And we're starting to, figure out better ways of exploring the coral cover and benthic community data that we get from the program, as well as working with AIMS LTMP, QPWS to actually improve the reporting of coral metrics from this program. We're not there yet. This is our first effort at sort of having a crack at this. But you can see that if we look across the entire marine park, many of the reefs are actually sitting at between 0 and 10% cover. There's a whole bunch that are sitting between 10 and 30% cover. And there's some in the Swains and the Cap Bunkers that are up well above 50% live coral cover. So there's parts of the reef that are doing very, very well. There's parts of it that are struggling. And when we're talking about these multiple cumulative pressures, it is just imperative that we do what we can to protect coral now. And I think various people have said it this morning, is that COTS is something we can do right now. It's tangible, it's targetable, and it's actually making a difference. If you have a look at the top right-hand corner there, on the left green and orange box is Manitou, the right is Riz. It shows you that essentially on the reef slopes where the Manitou is being conducted, we are losing a little bit of coral, but we've probably lost a lot less than we would have lost had we not controlled COTS. And on the right, the Riz, which had tended to be done up on the reef crests, we're not losing much at all. So that we're doing a pretty good job of protecting coral on the shallow parts of the reef. And that's also the part of the reef that's most vulnerable to other stresses like storms and bleaching events. So we have to sort of think about COTS control and where it fits into this broader strategy to protect coral across the marine park. On the right-hand panel on the bottom, that's our observed versus predicted change in coral cover that we've worked on just recently. And that's based on the predicted line, the yellow line, is actually based on some modelling work that was done from the AIMS LTMP data. So for their sort of 105-ish monitoring reefs. And we've looked at, if you look across the x-axis there, you can see that we're going between 0 and 3 COTS per tow. So at the very highest densities of COTS, when we first surveil a reef, we're potentially saving between 10 and 20% of the coral that we predicted would be lost had we not started culling on those reefs. It's less of an impact, obviously, when we're at the left-hand end of that scale and we're looking at relatively low COTS densities. But we are starting to kick some goals, we are starting to save some coral, and we are certainly culling a lot of COTS. Mike Emsley's going to be talking to you tomorrow about the AIMS LTMP data, and there's some promising signs there. Okay, so some of the key messages that we've got here. Obviously, we've greatly improved the operational effectiveness and efficiency under IPM. COTS are now successfully managed at the scale of individual reefs rather than just individual sites, which are particularly important for tourism. And there's the potential that we can scale that up to regions. And I think the Cap Bunkers at this point, as an isolated kind of contained region, is our best case study at this point, that we can scale up from an individual reef scale to a regional scale and actually make a difference in places like that. The current 5-vessel fleet seems to be actioning about 100 reefs per year. And that's very important for us at GBRMPA and our strategy, thinking about how we're going to prioritise reefs and where we're going to direct the effort. So we're trying to do that in a much more inclusive way this year. We're trying to do that in a much more transparent process and draw upon all the latest data to make that as thorough a process as possible. So prioritising reefs for COTS management is absolutely fundamental to the success of the program. And as I said, we're trying our absolute best to get that as watertight as possible. Proactive monitoring is critical. We need to go hard and we need to go early. We need to pick up these outbreaks and we need to jump on them straight away. Okay, Improved data integration between the COTS program, the AIMS LTMP, FMP, is going to allow us to provide some more thorough assessments of the level of coral that we're actually saving through this program. Okay, so as I said, we've actioned about 10,000, nearly 11,000 hectares of reef. And I think as Dave Westcott said, you know, the investment being about, what was it, Dave, 0.2% of the total asset value. Well, it's a pretty small investment when you consider that's 11,000 hectares of reefs. And I would argue that that's a lot cheaper than what it would cost to actually restore those 11,000 hectares with nubbins tied onto lines. Yeah, and I just to cite Dave Westcott again here, because I think he just really nailed it with this particular quote. Manual control currently represents the only demonstrably effective means of addressing the threat posed by COTS. And it's going to be a critical tool as we move forward to protect the resilience of the GBR. So I think that's spot on. It's the best thing we've got now, and until we get to the point where we would consider that it would be ethically or in any way responsible to, you know, gene edit COTS out of existence, I think what we're looking at is effective manual control of COTS, and that's the way it's going to be for the foreseeable future. We do need to pick up in terms of our data collection, in terms of coral cover within the program, and we want to do a much better job of that. So there's a whole lot of improvements that can be made within the IPM and more broadly with reef prioritisation. We're certainly moving that forward, and we appreciate the help that all of you are providing to make that happen and running a really successful program. So thank you to everybody.